Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures, and today we're doing part 97 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights. We take a look at some of the wonderful mods people will be making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. And today we're getting back into another bunch of fishes as we make our way up to part 100, which I've got a couple of cool things in plan for part 100, as you guys will probably see. But yeah, we're going to be starting off today. Our first fish is the Paradise Fish by Leaf Buffzoo 123 free digital models. So a really cool little guy here. So this is the Paradise Fish. These guys are a type of gourami, which are also a type of like Bowfin Fish. And these guys prefer freshwater, brackish, or open pelagic waters that are up to about 16 to 26 degrees Celsius. So they kind of like warm tropical water and open water as well. So their natural distribution is about around the China from Yangtze Basin south to Hainan Island in Taiwan, also found in northern Vietnam. And they've been introduced in subtropical and tropical places around the world because they are very popular with aquarists and very common in the aquarium trade, which is also pretty cool. Nonetheless, still very awesome fish. So in terms of their size and weight, in maturity they get about 6 to 7 centimeters snout to vent length, around 6 to 7 centimeters, a common length, that they can get up to 5.5. So 5, 6, 7 is generally their kind of length. And you can see some of the really cool things that they have here, because they're obviously paradise fish. They're really, really beautiful colors. You can see they're blue and red along here, so there's kind of blue on the top, especially around the caudal fin. There's a lot of red there. These red stripes going down along with the blue flecks around the face and things like that really does give it a very different look, and it's kind of just one of the really cool things that gives its name. It's just like a really fun looking tropical fish that everyone knows and loves. So some other cool facts about these guys: these are obligate air breathers. So adults inhabit typically any like lowland habitat on like margins or rivers or streams and things like that, or even on farmland. And they actually can colonize stagnant water bodies that have very low oxygen content because they are an air breather. And they can be found in streams, ditches like that, that allows them, because they are air breathers, that allows them to be so flexible with the habitat. They typically feed on small aquatic animals that include smaller fish, and males will actually fight each other. And they were also the first ornamental fish bought in Europe after the goldfish. So these guys were often found in Germany and France around like 1876 as a fish that people could keep in a tank after goldfish. And males will fight each other. They're kind of a relative, not closely, but they're similar that way of betas, so males will fight each other. You got to be very careful. And the minimum size is about 80 centimeters for a tank for these guys. And another thing about their lives, that these guys are a bubble net builder. So what they do, the males will swim to the surface, draw a little air through his mouth, and then he envelops it in a film of saliva, and they will form bubbles. And upon building this nest, the male will drive the female up towards it, and then the female will spawn, then the male follows, and the male will pick up the fertilized eggs within his mouth and push it into one of the bubbles in each bubble in the nest, and the males will guard them until hatching. And these guys are quite prolific. They can have up to 500 eggs in a breeding event. And due to being so common, they are considered least concern, so there's no really big threats to their lives, which is pretty cool. And they're pretty much a very common, as I mentioned, a very common aquarium fish. They do well in most aquariums as long as you have enough space for them, and being subtropical to tropical, they're very flexible in that regard. And yeah, they also can be found commercially because of the aquarium trade. But yeah, really, really awesome fish. I do love a paradise fish. So that was done by Leaf Buffzoo and 123 free download models, whatever the name is. But now we're moving on to some other fish we got by Leaf Buffzoo and Fishing Planet. We've got the Alaska Blackfish, which is another cool fish here. So look at these cool little guys. So these guys are a type of like a little pike or mud minnows, is the kind of name as well. These guys are freshwater and can be found in boreal waters. So as implied, these guys can be found in Alaska. So these guys can be found in the Colville River Delta and the Central Alaskan Peninsula. They can also be found in many Bering Strait islands and also northeastern Siberia, which is quite interesting. They're also quite large. These guys can get about a foot long, or 33 centimeters total length, male for unsexed. Their common length is about 10 centimeters. And the maximum recorded weight has been about 366 grams, so a little under 400 grams. So they are a decent sized fish, and they have reported to live up to 8 years. So you can see they've got very distinct look to them. They've got a very long body, and they have a short face, as they're kind of similar to pikes in that regard. And they also have very interesting colors to them. They can get like orange or kind of washed yellowish like this with these dark splotches on them. So very, very interesting. And these are irregular as well, so you can kind of just spot them all over the side of them. And in terms of their biology, these guys are also facultative air breathers, so they can breathe air. And they are typically found in heavy vegetated swamps and ponds, but they can also be found in medium and large rivers with large amounts of vegetation. And their migrations do actually seem to be limited to inshore or upstream movements to spawning grounds in the spring, and then they reverse these migrations to deeper waters in the fall. These guys are oviparous, so they lay eggs, and they are batch spawners, and they're quite well known for their tolerance of cold water, so they actually can survive water less than 20 degrees Celsius for up to 40 minutes, and actually can survive a few days after completely freezing parts of their body, even the head, which is really interesting. And they can also use their esophagus as an auxiliary breathing organ, so that's how they use it to breathe air. So they come up to the air like to the surface of the water like that and breathe, which is really, really interesting. And they do like colder water, like between 4 degrees and 14 degrees Celsius. So they do like that cooler water, which is really cool. In terms of their breeding behavior and mating behavior, upstream movements typically will coincide with the rise of water temperatures to 10 to 15 degrees. So females would normally contain 2 sets of eggs, with the smaller one presumably being set to which is spawned the following year. And females will deposit between 40 and 300 eggs, and the number increases the larger the fish gets. And a female will probably spawn over the period of several days, or possibly longer, with only a few eggs being extruded after each spawning act. And obviously the males will come and fertilize that and do their thing. These guys are also a species considered least concern, and they are fished for their food. They're for subsistence fisheries, and they also can be found in aquariums and things like that, and also commercial. So really, really awesome fish. Really awesome. And yeah, this one was done by Leaf Buffzoo and come from Fishing Planet. Next one's also done by Leaf Buffzoo and Fishing Planet. We have got here the common Dace. So these guys are a type of minnow, and their kind of Greek name means white mullet, and their genus name and their scientific name means shining bright or shining white. So that's pretty interesting. So, interesting name for these little guys here. So, these guys typically live in fresh water that can be found in brackish or benthopelagic or open water. And they like temperatures between 4 to 22 degrees and like depths of a meter or more. So, they do kind of like that little bit deeper water. These guys are found in Europe and Asia. They can be found across the Baltic, White, and Barents Sea basins. Also, the Volga and Ural areas. Basically across the Mediterranean up until like Romania, Finland, and populations in Siberia and East Asia are actually believed to be a different species, but these guys have been common around Europe and like Central or Eastern Asia. No, Western Asia I think it is. Yeah, that's Eastern Asia. Yep. So Eastern Asia, kind of where Europe is, and out into that, these guys are quite common, and there's another species the other way, that way. So in terms of their size and weight, these guys can get a bit bigger. These guys can get about 40 centimeters total length for males and sex as well, and the common length for these guys is about 15 centimeters. They have a maximum published weight of about 1 kilogram, and their max reported age is about 16 years, so they're quite long-lived for fish. So these guys get their name, the common dace, or the scientific name, because they're quite brightly white-colored and they shine brightly, which is pretty interesting. They don't look too different from most other fish. This is kind of like the stereotypical fish that you see in your head, but they're still really brightly colored in that regard, so that really get their name, obviously shining bright, or the whitefish, which is really interesting. So in terms of their biology, these guys are gregarious, so they tend to hang out in big groups. They swim near the surface, and they tend to inhabit moderate to fast-flowing large streams or large rivers with rocks or gravel bottoms. And these guys will also aggregate in like really dense swarms in the winter in the lower reaches of rivers or backwaters, and often migrate to spawning streams through autumn and overwinter there. And the juveniles actually spend winter in cavities along the shore, and each juvenile occupies a very shallow shoreline habitat where they grow, and then they leave for the shores of fast-flowing water. And then this feeding larvae will thrive along the shores, where they typically prey on things like small invertebrates. They'll also spawn in fast-flowing water on shallow gravel beds, often in these small tributaries, and they breed from March to April. And they have pale yellow eggs that can be found attached to the gravel and stones of shallow flowing waters. And these guys, as I mentioned, they'll typically take these large migrations that can be up to tens of kilometers to these spawning sites in these tributaries. And these males will kind of form these large aggregations, with the male defending a small territory, and the females will then lay sticky eggs onto excavations made in the gravel. So these guys, in terms of their conservation status, these guys are considered least concern. These guys are also a game fish or a bait fish, so they're often commonly used for baits, and they are considered a potential pest in some areas, which is obviously very not good, and have been reported in gain access to island, things like that, and which is obviously not good. But yeah, very, very interesting animal, and also comes from Leaf, Buffzoo, and Fishing Planet. So we're moving on from one common to another common. We're moving from the common Dace to the common Shub, also from Leaf, Buffzoo, and Fishing Planet. So these guys also just called the Chub, other than a common Chub. Very funny little guys here. So these guys are also a type of minnow. They're kind of that same family. Different genus, though, to the common Dace. So these guys typically live in fresh, brackish waters, or bethnopelagic, so like deep open water. And these guys can be found at depths of like 0 to like 100 meters or whatever. They're typically not too worried about the depths of water, and they typically like temperatures between 4 and 20 degrees Celsius, so quite a wide range there. They like the temperate waters. These guys are typically found in Eurasia, so they can be found in the Baltic, the northern wide Caspian Sea basins. They can be found in Great Britain, Scandinavia, Finland, Sweden, north of Stockholm, and they have been introduced elsewhere, but they're naturally absent from Italy. But yeah, they have, of course, as I mentioned, they're always kind of considered a pest, but they've been introduced to other places for fishing. So these guys are also quite large. Let's see if we can find one that's not swimming around. I think there probably will be. We'll have to wait until they're finished eating. But anyway, these guys typically get about 60 centimeters from snout length, snout to vent length, or total length, you could say. 60 centimeters, but common up to about 30. And they have a published weight of about 8 kilograms, and they have a reported age of 22 years. So, again, quite a long-lived fish. And these guys are not too different. They're very stereotypical-looking fish, but they have this very interesting dorsal profile. They've got these large mouths that allow them to suck things, and they've got this really wide face and a little reddish around the anal and fins there, the caudal fins and things like that, which is very interesting. But the pelvic fins as well is like orange to red, and they've got these bands on them as well. These guys have often quite stretched anal fins as well. That can be up to about 15 centimeters total length, or straight length, you could say. And these guys, in terms of their biology, these guys are mostly abundant in... let's have a look at you since you're swimming. These guys are mostly abundant in small rivers and large streams, and they can be found with barbel zones, with pools and things like that. They're also found along the shores of slow-flowing lowland rivers and even very small mountain streams and large lakes, where they undertake spawning in these inflowing streams. So typically, adults are solitary, and while juveniles occur in groups, so the feeding larvae and juveniles will live in these very shallow shoreline habitats, and they feed on a wide variety of aquatic and terrestrial animals and plant material as they kind of mature. And large individuals prey predominantly on other fish, and they breed in fast-flowing water along the gravel bottoms, and they are actually really among submerged vegetation. And these guys are also quite popular with angular sports fishermen or amateur sports fishermen, and they can be caught with various baits, but they're not very good eating, so they're kind of just good to catch, but not good to eat, which is kind of fun. Typically, as I mentioned, the spawning kind of occurs in fast-flowing water along above gravel bottoms, and they're actually rarely found among submerged vegetation. So they spawn more than once during a season, and a female will actually spawn with several males. And the males assemble at spawning sites following the ripe females, and often with much splashing and shallow ripples and things like that. And the female will lay her sticky eggs onto the gravel, and then the male obviously comes and fertilizes them. These pale yellow eggs will be found on the gravel, weeds and stones of flowing rivers and things like that. And yeah, they're another species of least concern. They're quite a common fish, as I mentioned, for people to angle or to catch. So there's really no danger to their populations there. They're kind of considered the game fish, but they have minor commercial. People don't really eat them, but they're still really, really cool in that regard. Really cool fish. I love these guys. So that's the common chub, also done by Leaf, Buffzoo, and Fishing Planet. We've got another cool guy coming up around here. We have got the Bowfin. So Bowfin should be up here. Really, really cool animal here. So these guys are a bowfin fish. Obviously referred to the name the bowfin. They're also kind of like, they look like kind of like a shark. They're related to shark heads. These guys are found in freshwater, subtropical waters of about 15 to 20 degrees Celsius. And they're typically found in, we're moving to North America. These guys are found in the St. Lawrence River and also the Great Lakes and Mississippi River basins. They can be found from Quebec down to the southern Pennsylvania and Texas. And they've been introduced sparsely other places. They've actually been found on the Atlantic slope north of Massachusetts. But they typically live in the Great Lakes and Mississippi basins, which is very interesting for this fish. They can also get quite large. They typically get between 38 and 68 centimeters long, but they have been recorded to get up to a meter long, or a little over a meter, about 109 centimeters. And they have a maximum published weight of 9.8 kilograms, so 9 to 10 kilograms is kind of their weight range for these guys. And they have a maximum reported age of about 30 years. And you can see here, these guys are very much built like big predators. You can see they've got these large head with these large teeth to attack prey. They've also got quite a long, like eel-like body, which includes a relative like the snakehead. They kind of look like snakes. They've got this very interesting pigmentation to them with these splotches and stuff like that to help them camouflage, like the light olive with these vertical bands going down them, which is really, really interesting, and these big teeth as well. These guys are also obligate air breathers, so these guys like to live in places such as swamps, lakes, pools, and backwaters of lowland streams, and can actually be found in near vegetation. And they're an air breather that can withstand quite high temperatures, which enables them to survive in stagnant areas. And they've even been known to estivate, but the lethal temperatures is about 35.2 degrees for these guys. These guys are also quite voracious and opportunistic feeders. These guys will subsist on fish that includes other sport fish. They'll also eat frogs, crayfish, insects, and shrimps. And they use their scent to pretty much capture the prey, and then they use suction feeding pretty much to just gulp the water into their mouth, which gulps the animal with it. And small juveniles will also eat animals such as microcrustaceans and invertebrates. Males are always smaller than females, and females will also live longer. And these guys are apparently somewhat migratory. We don't really know how migratory we could say there are, but they are somewhat migratory, and they will move during spawn seasons. Also, their eggs are adhesives, and they attach to decaying vegetation and upright weeds. And larvae can typically be found in nests, remaining attached to roots or lying to the bottom under like adhesive organs to be absorbed, and therefore like a tight spawn guarded by the male parent outside the nest. And another cool thing about these guys, are almost considered like a living fossil and the lone survivor of their family Amelidae. So they're kind of like a last of their kind of thing, which is really, really cool, but luckily they're doing quite well. They're considered least concern. Males will typically build and guard nests and young, and they'll usually nest in colonies where they clean out vegetation for the nest. And they're most active during twilight and dawn, and they will spawn at night, and the eggs will hatch 9 days after being laid, with the young larvae being about 8 millimeters long. And these larvae will be guarded by the male until the larvae can swim freely. So that's a really cool thing about these guys. Good parents. They're also considered least concern, and they're considered harmless as well, but their fisheries are not really important fishery. People don't really like fish for them for food, but they're a cool game fish, and they also can be found in public aquariums because of their large size. Most people shouldn't really have them, but a really, really awesome fish. I do love these guys. Bowfins are definitely a very interesting fish. People that like fish with big teeth definitely like these guys, or if you're amateur anglers, you'll definitely like this guy. So, yeah, next we're moving on to another one. We've got our last big fish from Leaf Buffzoo and Fishing Planet. We've got here the big mouth. So these guys are a type of kind of carp, or are a sucker fish, you could say. Really, really interesting fish here. See, these are the big mouth buffalo. So yeah, these guys are, I believe, a type of carp. Yep. These guys are kind of sucker fish, and they're actually the largest North American species of this group. And they're actually one of the longest living and latest maturing freshwater fish. They're capable of living up to 110 years and reproducing infrequently. And even after a century old, they show no signs of like aging, and they seem to be almost like a biological marvel. But they're not really a true carp, nor any other fish in the sucker family. They're from the same order, but they come from different continents. So they kind of look like a carp, but they're not directly related to carps. Kind of the same general family, but they're not a true carp. These guys typically live the confines of the countries of Canada and the US. So they can be found in Manitoba, North Dakota, the Mississippi River, Texas, Alabama. They can also be found in places such as Saskatchewan and Manitoba in northern US. The northern North America, you could say, but they're found in Canada, and they've been introduced to places such as California and Los Angeles obviously for game fishing, which is really interesting. In terms of their ecology, these guys are pretty integral to the ecosystems they live in. These guys, as young, are prey for animals such as alligator gar, walleye, pike, and these guys are also filter feeders, so they will feed on like invasive mussels as well, and during their planktonic stage, or pain of that, they filter feed on invasive zebra mussels and things like that. And they form to the native counterpart of the invasive bighead or silver carp, which they can, and they compete with also the common carp as well, or the bighead or silver carp. So these guys are like their natural big filter feeder, but while competing with the silver carps and things like that, which is kind of sad that they're invasive. But these guys obviously should take priority because they are getting out-competed by these species. But really, really awesome. These guys are also popular food fish throughout the United States and have been introduced to a few other states so people can catch them and have designated water bodies that they can catch them and obviously eat them. And though they have small bones expanded in muscle tissue like northern pike, these guys have one of the most valuable in the non-game freshwater food fish because they're just so valuable and delicious, which is really, really cool. And in terms of the ecology, these guys have a rather actually unique ecology. These guys are, the larval guys are pelagic, and they sometimes are benthic feeders, so they feed on copepods and phytoplankton and things like that. And unlike the close relatives, these guys are a filter feeder, so they have very fine gill rakers that allow them to filter out food and things like that, which is very, very interesting. And as they adults, so basically as babies, they'll feed on copepods, and adults, they'll become a filter feeder. And the juveniles and adults have a more lamaic plankton feeders, and they also eat like algae, things like that. The optimum habitat for spawning big mouth is like highly vegetated water, and they're quite a very they're a very resilient fish. They tend to like to they can tolerate high turbidity and low oxygen levels as well. And they're also a spring spawner, so these guys will generally spawn between April and June, where the temperature is between 13 to 26 degrees. They broadcaster, so they typically will just lay the eggs in the water, and they'll just go, and then the females will seek highly submergent and imminent vegetation, which is the ideal vegetation and habitat for their eggs, hatching eggs. So the substrate can be found generally as a mix of rubble and gravel and things like that, and that's where they kind of hang out around them as well. So these guys, the onset of sexual maturity is actually mostly unknown, and it varies a lot in latitudes. So in certain places like northern Minnesota or southern Minnesota or North Dakota, they can be mature up to about 10 years, males about 6 years. But other areas, typically they will grow at a much slower pace simply because there's less food. But they are group spawners, and they can lay a lot of eggs. They can produce 250,000 eggs per kilogram of adult body weight. So a large fish like that would really be able to produce a lot of food and a lot of eggs, really. And these guys are also quite a large fish. These guys can get up to about 4 foot long and about 36 kilograms. So these guys are quite large, but they get obviously competition from sturgeon and pelagic fish. And also silver carp, which are invasive in the US, which is very bad. And these guys, there's very urgent conservation needs for these guys, or an urgent need of change. They are kind of considered quote-unquote at least concerned, but there's actually a lot of threats that they're facing. These guys are quite negatively affected by dams, so this pretty much hurts their ability to find preferred habitat. These guys are also quite commonly hunted, So in a lot of places they're kind of considered endangered, but overall they're considered least concern. They also compete, as I mentioned, with the carp and silver carp and other introduced fish. They compete with these guys, so they're obviously not enough resources to go around, and these guys are the native species, so often they're just not equipped to compete with fish like that, which sucks. But yeah, hopefully people do try to take more notice of the big-mouth buffalo, and hopefully some better conservation efforts are put in place, things such as getting rid of silver carp and things like that. But yeah, really, really awesome fish. How can you not love the big-mouth buffalo? A really, really cool guy here. So now we're moving on to definitely a really cool big giant fish here. We have got the silver carp, or not the silver carp, giant barb, I mean. But these guys are a really cool fish. These guys are a true carp, and these guys are freshwater bathopelagic podobous fish that live in tropical waters. The giant the giant carp here, or the giant barb, is another common thing for their name. These guys, they're also called the I believe it's the Siamese giant carp is their other name. These guys can be found in Asia, around the Mekong and Chowapara basins, and these guys get huge. They're the largest species of carp, I believe. They can get up to about 3 meters long, or about 300 centimeters total length, and they can weigh up to 300 kilograms. So that's a very, very big fish. This is probably the biggest species of carp you can get. And as you can see, they're very, very large in all that regard. And they have long gill rakers with that big gill arch and things like that. So, in terms of their biology, these guys typically live in large rivers, and seasonally, like in these canals and floodplains. Adults prefer big pools in the Mekong, and at least part of the year the juveniles mostly seek swamps and small tributaries, and from there sometimes collected and stocked in ponds. So these are migratory species. They enter flooded forests as well, and younger individuals occur in October in the lower Mekong basin. These guys are pretty generalist as well. They feed on algae, phytoplankton, and fruits from inundated or submerged terrestrial plants, also detritus as well. But sadly, their numbers have been decreasing seriously, and individual fishes actually really survive to reach their reproductive maturity. And the catch should be strictly regulated by size, because these guys are a very desirable food fish, and they're sometimes eaten fresh or pickled. And they're threatened a lot due to overharvesting and habitat loss, which has very sadly led them to have the conservation status of critically endangered, and they're just so much hunted for their habitats being destroyed, and also they're collected a lot for food, which really hurts their populations. As being such a big fish, they're slow breeding, so there needs to be much better regulations on these guys, but still really, really awesome fish. These guys were done by Buffzoo and Monsoon. Monsoon really did a really wonderful job bringing this carp to Planet Zoo. It looks really, really awesome. So we're moving on from fish now, not so many fishies. We're going to be moving on to the northern white-cheeked gibbon, done by Leaf. So this is a really cool animal. This is another critically endangered animal, sadly. So this is the northern white-cheeked gibbon. This is a type of gibbon native to Southeast Asia. And these guys are sexually dimorphic. As you can see, the males have different colors from the females. The male is the black one that we're kind of talking about here with the white cheeks. And then the females are much more yellowish with the white cheeks as well. And you can see them break out there. How awesome. The males, as you can see, have the black hair and the gular sac that they use to produce large, deep vocalizations as well. And like other members of their genus and other gibbons, they have very long arms that they use to brachiate, which helps them get around their habitats of tall trees and things like that. In terms of these habitats, typically the northern white-cheeked gibbon can only be found in northern Vietnam and northern Laos. And they were actually formerly known in southern China, but they were believed to be extirpated in 2008 and confirmed to be extinct in China in 2013, which sucks. But there are a couple populations. As I mentioned, they are critically endangered. In terms of behavior, they're not too different from other gibbons. They're diurnal, so they hang out during the day, and they feed on fruits, leaves, buds, and flowers, and they may eat a lot of small animals as well, so they hang out in the trees. They're fully arboreal. Let's have a look at a female while we're talking about them. So they're very similar in that regard to most gibbons. And they're generally sociable, so they can live in groups of up to 6 individuals, though individual groups do not travel far and are believed to be territorial. And they are diurnal, so they spend their night high in the branches sleeping. And the call of these gibbons are actually considered one of the most complex And the gibbons call actually differ a lot between males and females as well. So they have many different notes and different vocalizations for different things like that, which is really interesting. And they'll have duets as well, which is also really cool. And they have a full chorus, you can say, which allows them to basically communicate to not only their group but other groups as they mark their territory and things like that, which is really, really cool. And let's talk about their reproductions. So we have here, where's the cute little baby? We need the cute little baby. Where is the cute little baby? Need to find him. I can't find him. He's so small. There he is. He's drinking in the corner there. Oh, this cute little guy. So in terms of reproduction, these guys are monogamous, like other species of gibbons, and they live in long-lasting pairs. The ovarian cycle for these guys is typically about 22 days, and gestation is about 200 to 212 days in this species. And at birth, these guys, as you can see, are covered in like a yellow buff fur and weigh about an average 480 grams or 17 ounces. Though at about 1 year of age, they typically will develop into their adult colors. So if they're a male, they'll change into a black color with pale cheeks. And then if they're a female, they kind of become more yellowish with the cheeks as well. And the sexually dimorphic adult coats actually grow in when they're about 4 or 5 years old. And during this period, they will actually sing the female form of call. So the juveniles will sing like a female. And they will also quite commonly engage in play behavior. So northern white-cheeked gibbons are also reach sexual maturity at about 7 to 8 years of age. And they can live for up to about 30 years in the wild. But as I mentioned, they're quite endangered. There's believed to be 57 gibbon groups living in Laos and about 22 in Vietnam, or from about 127 individuals in Vietnam. So probably no more than a few hundred individuals alive, which sucks. And again, these guys typically like these old forests with tall trees to climb in and things like that. But sadly, they're destroyed, get often hunted a lot by people as well, and also habitat degradation really hurts their populations. But yeah, it really sucks, but these guys are luckily protected. Where they live now is pretty much areas of importance, so they kind of consider national parks, things like that, so they are monitored. But yeah, hopefully these guys start spreading and becoming more common soon, because these guys are really wonderful animals, and we hate to see an animal like this go extinct, I think. So yeah, really, really awesome there. So last but most certainly not least, we've got a really cool animal here done by Leaf, Pure Winter, and Gaboy. We've got the Jarvan Tiger. So these guys are a subspecies of tiger, or Panthera tigris sornidata. So these guys were endemic to the Indonesian island of Java up until the 1970s. So if you keep up on taxonomy, some people consider them the same, like island tiger, which is synonymized with the Bali and Sumatran tiger, but these guys are sometimes considered their own thing. These guys are small compared to mainland tigers, but they're larger than Bali tigers and kind of more similar in size to the Sumatran tiger. These guys usually have long and thin stripes. This is actually not really properly what they look like. They wouldn't look too different from other tigers, but this is kind of just what the model was. But yeah, really, really awesome to see more tigers. But these guys typically have a mean body length, or had a mean body length of about 248 centimeters and weighed between 100 and 151 kilograms, or about 220 to 311 pounds. And females were smaller than males and generally weighed between 75 and 115 kilograms, or about 165 to 254 pounds. So the reason is that these guys may have been a bit smaller than your mainland is typically because these guys live on an island, and there is a common thing of island dwarfism, where animals that are often large, so things like big cats, elephants, things like that, will become smaller over time because there's less resources. And these guys would have preyed on animals that obviously lived in Java at the time, so like water buffaloes and deer and things like that. So a lot of them are smaller. And these guys would have inhabited most of Java, but around 1970, the only known tigers lived in the region of Meru Balindi, which was the highest mountain in the southeastern parts of Java. And these guys would have preyed on bantangs, Javan roosters, lots of waterfowl, and wild boar, which sucks. And nothing is really known about the gestation period or what in the wild or captivity. But up to about World War II, there were some species or some specimens kept in Indonesian zoos, but they were closed after the war, and it was easy to obtain Sumatran tigers, so they kind of replaced them in captivity. So what's really, really sad is this as a subspecies even it's mirrors a lot of what happens to other species as well. There were bounties put on the tiger around the 1930s, and they were considered a plague to people living in rural areas because it obviously took livestock and took people's lives. And the killing of tigers increased about the 20th century, with 28 million people living in Java, and with the production of rice actually being insufficient to supply the growing human population. So the bounty people went out to kill tigers to make money, and they were also poisoned. They were also their forests were destroyed during World War II because people wanted to grow food, and also war and things like that. The Javan rooster was also lost a lot to disease in several reserves and things like that, so that really hurt the populations. And until about 1960, there was only about 10 to 12 individuals living in the Ujala Kulong Park, where the last Javan rhinos live today. But sadly, these guys lived in these protected areas, and after about 1979, there's been no real big sightings of these guys, or after a few bangtangs, things like that. There's really just been nothing really. There's not really much more suitable habitat for populations of tigers. But this hasn't stopped a lot of people saying sightings. There was an episode of Extinct or Alive to try and find the Jarvan Tiger. So it's very possible there could be some small populations. The latest sighting was about 2017. There was a guy that allegedly took a photo of a Jarvan Tiger, but it was actually a Jarvan leopard. But yeah, hopefully there has been some evidences since they kind of become a cryptid at the moment. It's really sad to think their story because, like other large predators, they just get blamed for things that really wasn't their problem, and there's just not enough space in the island for people and tigers, and sadly the tigers lost their battle. But luckily we still have things like the Javan rhinoceros. And there are still hope. There are, as I mentioned, there's still people finding sightings like that. People putting out camera traps and reporting sightings. These people still looking for Javan tigers. So it's very possible that at least there's still a couple out there, maybe, hopefully. But maybe that's something that could also come back with the extinction, things like that, because they're not too different from, obviously, other populations of tigers. And yeah, just a really cool animal. So, yeah, I think this will be a very great place to end the video. Really nice to see some more fishes and stuff like that. Who doesn't love some fish? And a couple more extra animals like that. So, yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified about anything. So, yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. And bye-bye.